The men then start to come after Vespucci, and Vespucci and the men start to retreat and go back to their ship as quickly as possible. And all the while, the giants are behind him and following. And he was taking one step, and they would take 3 steps. I mean, these were massive people. Or he would take 3 steps, they would take 1 step. They were so large. And then once they got to the water, and they are going on their ship, back to the ship, the giants still were walking in the water because they were so tall. These islands were called the Islands of the Giants, and these are 2 skulls of the giants who lived here, who were over 7 feet tall.
Well, we're having morning coffee with Heather Arnold, and coffee and Chinese restaurant tea. She is on the other side of the world, exact opposite side of the planet from where I grew up in Nova Scotia, I think now, in Aruba. What's the weather like in Aruba today, this time of year?
Oh, it's beautiful. It's sunny. It's about, there's a nice breeze. The ocean is, it's a beautiful day in Aruba.
Is it always like that?
Yes, it's an endless summer, really. This is our rainy season, so we might get rain a little bit overnight or in the morning. Yesterday we had like one heavy bout, but it's nothing that's really lasting. So our climate here is considered semi-arid. So it's
I'm on to you, Heather. Now I know why you live there. Actually, we're going to find out hopefully why Heather lives in Aruba today. But we're here with Heather Arnold, independent researcher. And you're working on a book, or is the book done? The author of The Island of the Giants.
Yes. So I had to put it on hold for various personal reasons, and I couldn't focus on it like I wanted to. So right now the book is on hold, but my intention is to get the book out. It'll be called The Giants, The Lost Race of Giants of Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao.
And you've put out some audio talks on this stuff, and you've done a bunch of different podcasts, and you've spoke at conferences on this subject as well. And I can imagine it being a lot of work based on what I've listened to and heard, that the book writing process, because you have so much to go through.
Yeah, my bibliography is like almost 50 pages long. So it's the skeleton of the book. I just need to really put it together better and organize it better. Plus, I have new information all the time, which is really the most difficult, especially now with trying to connect the cosmology of the time of the giants with what we find here on the ground. So that's been a more complex project, but ultimately the book will be amazing with lots of pictures. That's what I really want to present, a lot of photos, and that's why I'm taking most of the photos myself. So yeah, it'll be a great book, but once it's out, but I will be continuing to work on it as soon as my life allows it, but it'll be shortly. I see the light at the end of the tunnel, so I'm happy.
I'm excited, and I'm excited today to talk about giants. We'll get to where I was at with giants here in a bit, but before we get into your this topic. But first I wanted to kind of just ask you, where are you from? When and were you into topics like this as a child? Did you get introduced to something like this, stuff like this, from uncles or aunts or whatever, or documentaries or anything like that? Or when did you first get introduced to lost ancient civilization, giants, things like that?
Question. I really started to get into it as a small child. My aunt traveled all over the world. She would go to Egypt, and she would go to the Far East and always bring me back some sort of artifact, rack. For example, I have a head. I still have it when they gave me that a replica of Tutankhamun's
Neat.
Death mask, and so things like that. And then my child, thankfully, and so I went to Colombia and Europe and other places in South America, Latin America, all over North America. So, and on those trips, I began to collect little trinkets and ultimately it was the petroglyphs that I saw along the way, a young child, to as recently as when I really began my research on the giants, which was in 2005. I began to notice the similarity. That was something I picked up very quickly as a child because I didn't understand. I kept asking questions and no one knew the answers. Not your teachers didn't know the answers, college professors.
Right.
Of course, especially in college, they always, but it never really sat well and didn't make much sense that, oh, because it's a collective and they're tapping in. No, what if we all just traveled? I mean, it was something really simple, or not just we all had to have the same caves and everyone had to be at a frequency. Oh my gosh! So I mean, this was something that I was actually told by not just one person.
I think it's definitely cultural diffusion. I think it's definitely more a cultural diffusion thing. Yeah,
100%.
And just also things that people saw, maybe in the sky and stuff for petroglyphs as well, like Squatter Man and things like that. But yeah,
it's just, like the one thing was the spiral. The spiral you'll find. I mean, that to me, I mean, I don't know. I guess I just don't understand it. Why is almost all petroglyph sites somewhere along the way have a spiral? Which way it's going, that could change. Even maybe the shape in some ways, if there are two together, which is also the case here in Aruba, which is also seen in other countries and other continents. Yes, that's specific and very particular. Also the squatting man, we also have that. There are things that there are things that you see that are could be universal for their for utilitarian purposes, such as a line that has triangles, a kind of that looks like water. I know, for example, in Three Rivers Petroglyph site in New Mexico, they do have this like a line with all these triangles attached. It would look like a snake except the points, and that could make sense. You want to indicate, particularly in a desert environment where there's water. Okay, that you can kind of get. But for example, here in a cave that I looked directly of my window, I see it, is a birthing chamber. And in that birthing chamber is a petroglyph of a pregnant woman who looks exactly like a petroglyph that's found in Japan. So how is it possible?
Weird.
It's very weird. And ultimately it means that there was a communication involved and there was travel involved. At the very least, maybe even the same people are involved. But ultimately that connection was, and no one had a really good answer, and that really was what sparked my interest in these ancient mysteries.
Yeah, petroglyphs seem to inform a lot of things. I think we can make more connections with them than sometimes mainstream gives them credit for. And so you said you were moving around a lot as a kid. Or you're not moving but traveling a lot? Did your parents work, or why did you get to travel so much? That sounds like fun.
Yeah, I was my father owned a business and was able to, when he needed to take time off, of course, like during a busier season, it was like winter, for example, in New York, which is where I grew up. People are sadly crashing their cars all the time because the weather is so awful and there's ice and snow. So during some of those winter months, we didn't necessarily always travel, but over the summers, we traveled extensively. We would go out west, spend a couple of weeks, which was nice. And I was a good student in school, and so I was either front load all my homework or or do, for example, a couple of times for my entire trip instead of doing any papers or tests or anything or any of the work that I missed in class. So I was able
Sweet.
to really, yeah, it was, and I'm thankful for that because the memories I have are of these trips, and it's almost like they're indelibly marked upon my DNA. And that's why I try to take as many trips as possible now with my daughter, because those trips, I think those experiences, they you feel profoundly different after you come back from experiencing something so outside realm. For example, I was just thinking today, I just went for a run at one of our beautiful landscapes here in Aruba. And when I was driving back to my house, I was thinking about how it has been almost 10 years since I've been to Easter Island, and how when after you come home from Easter Island, you feel profoundly different.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's different. I don't even know how to articulate it in words because it's more of a sense and this almost a feeling of not enlightenment. I wouldn't want to go that crazy, but definitely a heightened sense of who you are in this world and how just amazing this world really is. And but there's an energy almost given off at these sites that stays with you. And I think that's why, if I can forego new clothes or a newest iPhone and instead go on a trip, definitely we're going on a trip.
Yeah, I think those sites likely were like the locations of not just one, but maybe even more than one past civilization. This is just my guess. I don't really know. I think it's a lot like Lord of the Rings. I think J.R.R. Tolkien was onto something, and there was different versions of people existing on the planet for a long time with the same, brain capacity or types of brain, similar sizes and similar abilities and similar sizes. And that's where we get into your topic, giants. But I still wanted to stick with you because I think you're interesting. What did you go? You mentioned school. What did you go to college for? And what was your sort of inspiration to do that? What were you trying to do?
Well, it's a sad story, actually. So, my dream was to be an archaeologist.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go to college for archaeology. And I
Uh-huh.
actually looked into universities, found great archaeology programs, including Columbia University in New York City. And I knew I would hopefully get scholarships, so ease a little of the financial burden of college, especially, at that time was still a fortune. Now it's even crazier. But
That's
so
insane.
I told my father, I said, my parents, particularly my father, because he's kind of the one who is the family. I said to him, I want to study archaeology. And he said, okay, when you graduate in 4 years and you don't have a job, what's your plan? Like, yeah, there is. That's a strong possibility that I'll be living in the desert on a dig, and maybe never getting with a university, or because eventually, you would want to be along with the university who could do funding and you could do all these expeditions and etc. When he said that, I thought, okay. So then I said, all right, I'll go and work in television. So television sales. So
Oh,
basically, I went to Syracuse University and I studied radio, television, film, the business side of radio, television, and film. So basically,
interesting.
how to run a business, radio station. But because I still had this burning passion of what I really wanted to be an investigator, a researcher, an explorer. I took a minor in Southeast Asian religion. And so all the different religions of Southeast Asia, and compared them, their art, their dance, their music. So that kind of kept that little fire burning within me. So I was grateful for that. Now my father was right. Before I even graduated Syracuse, I already had a job, so people came
Nice.
and recruited me right. So I was working in Manhattan 9 days after graduation. So, and it was, yeah, you know, it was field. It was very stressful. It was not my dream. But it was definitely exciting gig, a lot sexier than being an archaeologist at that time. Now I think it's
Uh-huh.
maybe flipped.
Right.
So it was enjoyable. So, but you know, once I got injured and wasn't able to, well, first of all, September 11th happened, and I traveled almost 300 days a year, which is also something that's very taxing if you're working in television, because I eventually wanted to start a family. And so then when September 11th happened, I was in New York City at that time waiting for my car service to take me to the airport, incidentally. I,
Wow.
yeah, it was really crazy. The travel just got so difficult, and so I just decided to switch to being a pharmaceutical rep, thinking I was helping the planet, and then soon pharmaceutical sales were really about. And then I had a
Right.
severe injury, and I was unable to do that job anymore because it was such extensive walking, carrying, etc. And then that's when I moved to Aruba.
Okay. So you were waiting for your car service at your apartment or whatever in Manhattan when September 11th happened?
I was going to Kentucky. I was meeting with the CEO of a cable. That's what I did in television. I did sales and marketing. So I would also negotiate 7 to 10 year contracts with CEOs or, you know, of major cable companies. At that time, it wasn't such a monopoly. There were a lot of still regional cable systems, et cetera. And so I was going to Kentucky to meet with a bunch of clients. Actually, as soon as I landed in Kentucky, I was going to be doing like a cave exploration. I always tried
Huh.
to attach some sort of adventure to my bit in when I had
Nice.
free time. So I was waiting. I was fully packed. I was dressed because I had a meeting right when I got off the flight. So then all of a sudden I was just like, I heard, you know, the planes going over my building. It
What?
was just one of the scariest days of was really awful. And so, I mean, hearing that your friends died and then walking up from downtown covered in the ash of the dead, it was just the smell in the city of just death. It was just very traumatizing.
Wow.
That because I traveled so much for television, I couldn't travel with the ease I had at one time because it was so many checkpoints and TSA and, you know,
Right.
it was all this stuff. And
It's like getting re-traumatized every time
yeah,
you go to the
it's every
airport.
time it's a very good point. Every time you kind of think, oh my God, this is all
Oh, for
because of
sure.
that thing. So it really took the fun out of September 11th. I think used to be much more fun. Even the flight experience, you know, it was much more enjoyable than now. So then I went to pharmaceutical sales, thinking I was going to help people. And then soon, you know,
Right.
seeing what it's really all about, especially in New York City and Manhattan. So,
And in the 2000s. In
right.
the, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, in the 2000s. Yeah,
So
it was the early 2000s.
did you work on specific shows in your television career?
Oh, it's so funny that I grew up in Nova Scotia because I worked for Much Music. So, um,
Okay. Wow. Neat. Yeah, that's fun.
so my company owned the U.S. distribution rights to Much Music. So I
Ah, I
worked
grew
from
up on
out of New
that.
York. Yes, out of New York and then out of Los Angeles. And then they moved me back to New York. So I was always up in Toronto, in Montreal. So doing with Music Plus, also the French version of Much
Right.
Music. So it was so great.
So the people who don't know, for you Americans, much music is sort of the Canadian MTV, but way better, like way better. It was
Much.
so much better in the 90s and early 2000s because all they would do was play either live performances or music videos. Imagine that, much music playing because because MTV stopped playing music videos in like 2003 or something. It was terrible.
Yeah, and then Much Music never really, fell to the need of selling commercials, and that was the
Reality
reason why.
shows.
Right, because MTV figured money because their budget was becoming so bloated that they decided to do broadcast long form films.
Mhm.
So, but older films, or just cult classics, sell the advertising and make more money during those long form films. And that's really, it started with, and then it went, and then it would just became nothing about music whatsoever.
Yeah, nothing at all. Yeah,
Why
yeah.
they even called it Much Music was ridiculous. But Much Music always stuck roots, and they gave a lot of and that was another show I was involved in. We had a show where we up and coming bands, and if they were, had a lot of talent and a lot of potential, then we would put them on a show that was an independent music show, just showcasing and highlighting independent world. It wasn't even just from the United States. So it was because we had to take the programming feed right from the Canadian satellite, but then we had spots within the day insert our own programming specific to the States or whatever. And so one of them was this independent music showcase, we called it. So it was very cool. And we went to concerts. We went to the Much Music Video Awards. It was fun. It was a fun time.
Yeah.
When music was
probably
still good,
watched
in
all
my
that.
opinion. I'm sorry?
I probably watched all that. We taped, what my brothers and I would do was tape like stuff off of Much Music like during the day, and then watch it when we got home, and then watch the
That's
other stuff on the
cool.
weekend. And
Yeah,
yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah,
That's
that is
great.
pretty cool.
Yeah.
That is sexier than Archaeology, maybe back in the 90s.
I agree. Yes.
But similarly, I always wanted to be like, well, I was always interested in history. Like I got kind of pilled on this stuff when I was like 10, like off of documentaries and whatnot, like that they would play on. I don't know if the U.S. had A&E, but in the middle of the night, A&E would play like documents In Search Of and things like that. So I got pilled into this stuff.
Yes, I love.
Yeah, but 9/11 was coincidentally like what got me to the States, because I was living in Nova Scotia at the time. I was going to community college, and then a bunch of stuff I won't get into happened around that time, including 9/11. And I was a U.S. citizen, so I moved to the U.S. and joined the Army. And then I was in the Army for like 8 years, from like 2004 to 12. But when I first like got out of active service and into the reserves or the National Guard, I started going to school for history and to be a coach. And then I realized there was this need for like veteran mental health services. And I was a medic in the Army, so it was like kind of a good transition. So I decided to go with that. So that's what I do now. But the podcast and now me coaching this basketball team is sort of me getting back to my roots of what I really wanted to be and do. And that's what I think is cool about your story, is that you did the same thing. After this cool career, you had an injury, and I have an injury too. Like it's a back injury that I just finished doing Tai Chi. I just finished doing Tai Chi right before this, because it's like one of the only things that helps really. But I'm trying to sort of reinvent myself and get into, and this was the way I found to do it. And so let's talk about that. You moved to Aruba. Did you have any idea? Okay, actually no, let me rewind. Before you moved to Aruba, what did you think about giants? Did you know much? Were you into giants at all?
I mean, I always was into giants. I was into Bigfoot, of course.
Okay, cryptids in general.
Yeah, exactly. Loch Ness monster, the paranormal. Me too, because I think there's a connection between the paranormal in some cases and our ancient history. I mean, I think there was definitely an over the sites and some of the places where there could be a vortex or a portal or a portal. So, the whole petroglyphs, I've had weird things happen to me at some of these sites, like batteries
Have you been to
draining.
Loch Ness?
I haven't
Have
been
you
to
been
a
to
lot.
Loch Ness?
I have not,
It's
sadly.
it's weird there too. It feels very weird there. Just FYI, because
Ah,
the Ness, the lake itself, is like one of the deepest in the world. It's like insane,
wow.
and it feels weird. I
Mm,
recommend going there and just spending a couple hours indulging your childhood self with a set of binoculars. I highly
yes.
recommend it. Um,
Nice. Did you see anything when you were there?
No. We stayed at this spot that was perfect for viewing the lake. It was like a small little kind of boutique hotel,
Oh,
and you could
nice.
view the Ness. And the
No.
guys that worked there were so nice. I asked if they had binoculars, and he said no, but he brought me in some because I had forgotten mine.
Ah,
And so I was able to use his binoculars, and my wife is going like, like, are you coming to bed? And I'm like, no, I'm looking for Loch Ness. But the moon was super bright that night. You could see the
oh,
lake
wow.
or the Ness perfect. It was a weird alignment between me being there and a full moon, and it was sort of a boyhood dream of mine. So yeah, that was pretty cool. So I did want to ask if you were into those sort of topics because I do think that they're connected as well to
Mhm.
spirituality and ancient civilizations and maybe knowledge that we've forgotten. So, were you aware of the giants of Aruba before you
No,
got to Aruba? Because
no, and
I'm
uh,
new to this.
yes, no, yeah, no one was aware of the giants of Aruba except probably the archaeologists. For sure were aware because they had been doing research on the giants of Aruba since the early 1900s, late 1800s. So they definitely were aware, but they didn't let anyone else in on it.
Hmm.
So I moved to Aruba and I had a broken back. I had broke my back in two places. So I
Oof.
had to recuperate for a year minimally. And during that time, I created an entire blueprint of what I wanted out of a tour company. And this business plan featured basically historically accurate tours. And I wanted to hire only local Arubans as the tour guides. And so once I began my quest, to find actually the historical accuracy of the history of Aruba and Bonaire and Curaçao, because those three islands, just to give you an idea of where we are. So from Aruba, I can see Venezuela. So we are only 16 miles away from Venezuela. I'm in the Atlantic time zone. So we are so far south that we're actually outside of the hurricane belt. So thankfully, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao, we never experience hurricanes. We are all pretty much semi-arid, desert-like climate. So we have huge cacti, palm trees of all sorts, very exotic tropical birds.
Sweet.
Um, we can see southern hemisphere constellations. We're
Nice.
starting to see them now. We'll see them throughout the winter until about April. So that we are only 12 degrees north of the equator, so we're considered equatorial
Wow.
islands. So it's we don't do daylight savings. We have 12 hours of daylight and 12 hours of darkness. It never deviates. So, but given that, it's interesting just to speak about the equator part. It's like time is so different here. It's such a
It must be.
strange thing the way time moves. And I was studying about how sometimes these ancient cultures would build these pyramids because at the top of these pyramids, the higher up you get, time moves differently. For example, at the top of at Everest, for example, or the surrounding
Right. That
Nepalese
makes sense.
villages, that time moves differently there. And the same thing happens here at the equator. We also don't have any tides. So it's a very strange place to be, but it's exciting and it's just another part of the adventure. So
I
getting
wonder
back
if
to
that has a effect on your physiology, like over
yes, I
time.
I always wonder that. I really always wonder that because that's a good point. Like the Sherpa guides, they have
Correct. Yeah.
more of an ability to operate with lower oxygen levels. That's always something I think
Well,
about.
if your body doesn't have to adjust to, a time change constantly throughout the year, it would have an effect on your physiology. I can't imagine how it wouldn't.
Right. I kind of agree with you. It's interesting. One thing is though, a lot of the babies here have low birth rates.
Hmm.
And that's not because of nutrition. Aruba is one of the wealthiest islands in the Caribbean, has almost a 98% literacy rate.
Wow.
Almost every single Aruban speaks a minimum of 4 languages fluently.
Weird.
So there was one of the highest GDPs of the entire Caribbean. So it's not for a lack of good food or it's a very religious culture. Catholicism is the official religion here. So it's very, it's a pretty decent population in terms of health and well-being. But I always wonder, is it something to do being that all these babies are born on the equator? I don't know, because it's fluid, right? And we don't really, have tides. We're not as affected by, well, we are affected by the moon, but not like, I don't know. It's very interesting. I would love to do more research on it. I don't even know. I've asked AI, and AI is like ridiculous. I want AI to catch up. I want it to get some things it's great for, but some things it's like, oh my gosh, If you ask AI about giants in Aruba, it'll say, oh no, it's even though the island was called the Islands of the Giants, and
Even
but
Grok?
does it? That I use Grok, and but they're not pulling from any of the archaeological reports, and the reason is because they're so hard to find the archaeological
So
reports.
you can't.
All of my research is from the archaeological report.
I'm gonna see if Super Grok can do it later. But
Okay.
when did you first catch on to the story then?
So yeah, it's interesting. So I was doing my own research because I couldn't find any of the true history of Aruba anywhere. Nothing in
You're trying to
books.
do this for your tours and stuff.
Exactly. This was just because I knew I wanted to stand out from the other tours. And so far, what I had seen, being like a little spy on taking these different tours from different tour companies as part of my research into building the business, was that I saw that there was a lot of hyperbolic speak and nothing about giants, a lot of stuff that wasn't accurate. Kind of just, these guys are storytellers, the tour guides, and they're working on tips. So they want to make it fun and exciting.
Right.
And so they're kind of just talking and making the people
Right.
laugh and giving them a good time, which is fine. But that's not what I wanted to give, because I already saw that every tour company was doing that. So that's why I went historically accurate tourism. I was watching a video, and it was the head of archaeology, who's still here in Aruba, and he was speaking about the 500-year anniversary of the founding of Aruba, and how he was, saying that, Aruba's been here for tens of thousands of years. It was just when Vespucci arrived that this is now when Aruba was discovered, and that starts our history, but that doesn't start our history, which, okay, I understand that, and it makes sense. But then he started out of nowhere, unprovoked and seemingly, out of context, just goes on and on about, even though the island was called the Islands of the Giants, there is no evidence of giants in Aruba. And I was like, what? I said, there must be giants in Aruba. And this guy is like, what is he talking about?
Yeah.
And that began the deep dive. It was because of his strange insistence that there were no giants. And then I'm like, wait, they were called the Islands of the Giants? And then that was the beginning of the deep dive. I read Vespucci's letters. I found the Mappus Mundi. You can see Aruba is clearly marked as the Island of the Giants. It's the first map of the New World. It was done in 1502 after Vespucci's first trip here to Aruba. And then I just started that ball rolling into trying to get every archaeological report. I think I have actually more archaeological reports now than even the Archaeology Museum. I went back all the way to the early early 1900s when the first giant skull was unearthed and verified as a giant skull. And even that was a whole German German article study. So that's the other thing too. All these things are in different languages, and I had to translate everything. But over the years, I've gotten a hold of pretty much every single archaeological report I could possibly get a hold of, including books. And from that, I just started digging in and seeing evidence after evidence of these measurements of these remains being found here in Aruba and Bonaire, especially. There's a whole archaeological report called the Bonaire skeleton. It's a book about the Bonaire skeleton, which is the largest giant remains ever uncovered in the ABC Islands. And so through that, I just set the ball rolling, and what took me down a rabbit hole of all these different instances of giants, and then everything was matching up. You go where the cemetery is supposed to be, and there's the cemetery, and you go to Bonaire and you see the giant skeleton. And now this past weekend, I was able to find out exactly in Aruba where Vespucci came in and met the giants. I found the giants' encampment, where their village, the remnants of their village. It's a huge platform with megalithic stones as the walls. I found a site of a recent archaeological excavation that was going on, all the test pits within a giant shell midden, which they were digging up. So,
where are you posting all this stuff?
So mostly, I post a lot on X and I post on Facebook. I try to make everything free and accessible and short and sweet in terms of descriptions, because I know people's with a lot of pictures, because I know people's attention spans aren't that long as they used to be. So I post a lot of pictures, and actually this hike is a tour that I offer as part of my tour company, because it's fascinating. And we go by a place where they were making their tools. It's one of the only places on Aruba where there's chert, and the giants knew to use the chert to make their tools. That's fascinating. Again, it's a connection globally as well. I mean, there are multiple cultures, ancient cultures, using chert, even into the Native American cultures in the United States. So of today. It's pretty cool, because now that I'm here, I used to make a list during my research. Oh, when I go back to Aruba, I have to go here. I have to go here. I have to go here. Now I can just go. It's really awesome. I don't have to I can make a list, but then I can do it in like an hour. So it's pretty cool.
That is cool. And I wanted to, could you give us a synopsis of like Vespucci, the whole Vespucci story? Would you mind doing that?
Yeah, no, it's a really cool story. So first of all, the story here is the history, just to let you know. Curaçao, which is our sister island, it's right next to Aruba. We can see it on a clear day from here. It says that it was where Vespucci. It's funny, the islands are all competing. Where did Vespucci go first? Yet they don't want to recognize that Vespucci found the islands. It's a very strange dichotomy. But nonetheless, so Curaçao says that Vespucci came there. So it didn't make sense, because where the Vespucci took off from was what is now mainland Venezuela. The closest point, Curaçao is very close, but the Vespucci, I know for sure, went to Aruba because of the way he started to explain the island and how he came up. It was easier to come up to Aruba, especially where he was coming from and where he was going, than to get to Curaçao, and especially to the land. So I worked with a cartographer. He's a world-renowned cartographer. He's based out of Europe. And we had a series of emails and conversations. And he figured he's an expert on the Mappus Mundi, which is the first map that was drawn up after Vespucci came to the New World. It's the official map of the New World. And he told me, and he had told me in his notes, to me, but I couldn't believe what he was saying to me. So I actually ended up speaking to him directly, because I had to get further clarification. he told me that of all the places in the Caribbean, Aruba was the most perfectly put on the map. It was the closest to the longitude and latitude where it actually sits today, which that's what makes this map so amazing, is how accurate it was. But every other island was a little bit off. But Aruba was perfectly placed. That would mean a couple of things. First of all, to me, it means they actually came here. They knew where it was because they actually came here, and that's why it was so perfect on the map. So then we worked with the nautical miles that Vespucci talks about. In his letters, what he writes about, he wrote about every detail, and he writes about specifically where he went on his ship to get to the island of the giants. And using all his calculations, it turns out it's Aruba. He couldn't have gotten to Curaçao from the point in Venezuela where he had left from. So now we know he came to Aruba, and now I know where he came in. And he talks about it. So he knew about Aruba because Columbus had been making connections with the mainland South Americans, and his connections with the tribes there told Columbus and his men about Aruba, which was then, they didn't have a name as of that point. And they would tell him that there were giants there. That's Columbus was the one who first found out about it, and that there was also potentially gold. And the mainlanders told Columbus and his men that the giants were not aggressive people, but if you came close to the island, they would fight you off, and they were very aggressive. So Columbus then went back to Europe, and through a series of events that I don't think he caused at all, I think were actually generated by Vespucci, especially marrying into the Medici family who was financing these trips. He ended up losing the contract, and Amerigo Vespucci got the contract to come to the next trip to the New World. Columbus was supposed to be the one coming to Aruba, but it turns out it was Vespucci. So when Vespucci arrives in Venezuela, the first thing he does is concoct a plan to come to Aruba, because especially if there potentially could be gold. And where, by the way, this area where Vespucci came up, they would definitely, in my opinion, given the amount of tools that I have seen in this tool making area, in my opinion, they were mining for something. And to me, it makes sense they were mining for gold, because you see all the signs of an area where there would be a gold vein in terms of the rocks and the other stones, the earth, and where it's located on the island, etc. So Vespucci comes on his ship. He comes to Aruba, and he sees footprints in the sand, and there are giant footprints. It's the first thing he notices. So the men get out of the ship and begin to follow the footprints when they come across these women, these giant women. And he describes them as being very tall. They were way taller than the men, almost double the size. They were with two teenage girls who were even, Vespucci makes mention, these teenage girls were even bigger than us. And they were young girls. And so they were thinking, the men, as they were interacting with these women, how big are the men? I mean, that was the first thing in their minds. So the women beckon them back to their village, which I have found the platform of where that village was. And they start to try to offer him drinks, and there appears to be some communication breakdown. Vespucci's, I think, a little paranoid at this point. And so he and the men begin to concoct a plan to steal the two teenage girls and bring them back on their boat so they can bring them back to Europe and show them as trophies of what they have found in the New World. And as the men are concocting this plan, and Vespucci says 36 men entered. It appeared that they all had weapons. Some weapons Vespucci used he probably wouldn't have even been able to lift. They looked so heavy, of stones and implements of which he had no idea their use even. And so these men come and they trying to communicate with Vespucci. Of course, Vespucci and his men have these intentions of stealing two of their young girls. So the men then start to come after Vespucci, and Vespucci and the men start to retreat and go back to their ship as quickly as possible. And all the while, the giants are behind him and following. And he was taking one step, and they would take 3 steps. I mean, these were massive people. Or he would take 3 steps. They would take 1 step. They were so large. And then once they got to the water, and they're going on their ship back to the ship, the giants still were walking in the water because they were so tall. They could still be above, their torso, their torso above water with all these weapons coming after Vespucci. So when they got on the ship and they saw the giants still coming, now they're in the water, Vespucci commands his men to fire off some cannon shots. He says not to hurt them, but to scare them. And once they do that, the giants at that moment then begin to retreat, but still stay on the beach. And Vespucci remarks that they were watching them the whole time from the beach. And once Vespucci, writes about this, he said, "I named this island the Islands of the Giants due to the large statured people who live there." And then he remarks, his final comments are that he thought he was going to die that day. He was so scared. Mind you, he had just left an island where he was watching the native population eat a human that was being cooked on a spit, but yet he was more nervous of the giants coming after him from Aruba. So that's essentially how the story started.
Wow. The only thing I've ever known about my ignorance, in Curaçao, they got really good baseball players and athletes in general. That makes me wonder if there's a connection between the giants and the excellent athletes and pretty good genetics in the area.
Yes, definitely. And the indigenous populations here who have never left the island, a DNA test, extensive DNA test through mitochondrial DNA was done on the population. And they were all found to still carry an ancient DNA that is hypothesized to be of the archaics, which is of the giants. So this is essentially where I believe the islands, where the giants went to. When people say, well, where did the giants go? I think they were starting to die out. And they just started mating with the average statured people who eventually did come to Aruba from mainland Venezuela. And they were cohabitating with each other, I believe peacefully, but I think the giants were in control. And then once the giants kind of started their numbers depleting, particularly after first contact with the Europeans, then I think they started mating with the other populations of average stature. And eventually that's what happened, I believe, to the giants. They essentially bred themselves out.
Do you think disease or epidemic could have played a role to like typical old world to new world visits?
Definitely. I think so for sure. Yes. And the giants also probably could have met with many violent deaths. I read a report about how the Catholic Church kept trying to build a church at one part of the island, but at that part of the island was the giants' territory, and the giants kept burning it down. So there could have been nefarious ways that some of the giants, where they went as well, they could have been just killed.
Where did you get this report? Where's this report from?
So Vespucci writes about it. It's called Letters from the New World. And what Vespucci did, and it's something to keep in mind, he wasn't just a treasure hunter or a thrill seeker or, some sort of pirate himself. What he was trying to do, he brought experts with him. He brought botanists. He brought people who were into the flora, the fauna. He brought doctors. He was bringing, at that time, what we would consider anthropologists with him. He was bringing a group of researchers, and they were documenting everything, including their hair, their eyes, the color of their skin, even
Wow.
sexual practices, what they were eating, describing the plants. He was really detailing his journeys through the Caribbean.
Wow.
And he wrote extensive letters. Anyone can read these letters. It's amazing. If you're into history, it's a very, very interesting series of letters about what he was doing. And essentially what he was also doing was trying to secure funding for his next time back. And he would mention, we have to go back here. We have to. So, it became so popular that they became books in that time in the early 1500s. And people would just sit around reading these stories of Vespucci and his travels and all the people he saw and interacted with, and all the different foods and what everything looked like, and he had drawings, so it's very cool.
I need to check that out.
Definitely.
You kind of I got stuck on giant sex. That's crazy. That must have been intense. So at these museums, so there's a hold on a second. There's a museum of archaeology in Aruba and a museum of Curaçao. I love museums. Will you tell me kind of your experience with these museums and tracking down artifacts and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, the museum here in Aruba is incredible. It's a recent museum. It used to be just a small series of rooms in a very old building by the church in town, but now it's in a historic landmark building that has been completely restored. It's absolutely beautiful. Its sister museum, and the one who helped with the renovations at the Museum of Archaeology here in Aruba, is the Smithsonian. So here again, we have this Smithsonian connection. That's quite interesting. I mean, the floors are mahogany. They got a lot of money to make this beautiful museum. There is only it's 2 floors, and then there are these gardens around it as well. But there is only one archaic tool in the entire collection that everyone can see. And that's the only one on display. It's kind of nondescript. It's mixed amongst the other more modern tools that have been found on the island. And so really the story begins in the basement. And fortunately, I have been down to the basement several times.
Nice.
And there you will see the strangest artifacts, nothing that will see the light of day. This is even according to the archaeologists. You'll see these strange kind of amphibian-like idol type things made of limestone. Very well carved, very intricate. And you see this repeated also in Curaçao. You see it in Bonaire. There was one piece that was in the museum, but that was given to Leiden University, or museum near Leiden University, for them to display. So it was of some sort of enough importance that the Holland, that the Netherlands wanted this to be on display. So, and the museum gleefully gave it over, which was so irritating to me. Thank God I have video and pictures of it, because it'll never come back to Aruba, let's face it. So in the basement, I know for a fact, before I was, when I still held the dream that the museum was going to be telling the real story of the giants, a friend of mine found a giant tool in an area that was, I believe, a tool making area, but also habitation and burials. But because there are several cave systems in that area. And outside one of the caves, he found a giant tool. He took measurements of it. Thank goodness I have all that. I have the photos. And I actually saw it as well. He gave it to the Archaeology Museum and said, "Hey, I found this." And the archaeologist said, "Wow, that is the biggest tool we've ever found on the island." And he took it and put it in a shoebox and put it in the basement.
What?
So This is kind of what we're dealing with. I'm not the only one dealing with this, particularly when it comes to giants. You know, a lot of us know about what Loch Cave, and there were giant skulls on display, and now they're gone. And I mean, this is just a series of, you know, people being threatened that their funding will be cut if they have these giant bones on display. And
This is the Smithsonian. I'm sorry, they're probably going to demonetize me or something just for saying that, but who knows? I think it's the Smithsonian.
they seem to have their tentacles in everything, you
Controlling
know.
the narrative, yeah.
Yes,
They control the narrative about the Grand Canyon. There's weird shit going on that they control the narrative there. They got their tentacles into everything, including Göbekli Tepe, I think. And so, yeah, I think it's a systemic narrative control that was likely been going on since, like, at least this deliberate version of it since World War II, since like a lot of information was like discovered and like sought after and like controlled.
I think you're right. That's a good point. Because even if you look at, like, in the past, you know, people were talking about giants a lot, especially with the mound culture in the United States. Farmers would be telling the newspaper, "Oh, I found a giant." Researchers were finding giants and publishing this in magazines and newspapers in the 1800s, going into the 1900s, the early 1900s. You would find these published reports, but even in the 1980s. So for the Curaçao Museum, there were 2 giant skulls on display. And they're from a burial ground here in Aruba. And the archaeological report is called The Quest for the Giants. And it was the ultimate conclusion that these 2 skulls came from giants. And because no one would look at these skulls, this gentleman who financed the entire dig to unearth these skulls from Aruba built a museum in Curaçao called the Curaçao Museum to put these skulls on display specifically. And in 1980, the Reading Eagle, which is a newspaper out of Reading, Pennsylvania, is still in print, by the way, published an entire article, of which I have a copy, of their experience going to Curaçao, particularly going to the Curaçao Museum and seeing the skulls of the giants. And just matter-of-factly said, "Oh, these islands were called the Islands of the Giants, and these are 2 skulls of the giants who lived here, who were over 7 feet tall." And that's it, matter-of-factly, you know. And now, since, by the way, I've been to that museum, I've spoke to the head of the museum and the curator, and there was a renovation of the museum by the Dutch, the Netherlands, and now those 2 skulls are missing. So when I went to the museum, they called the archaeology. They also have an archaeology department called the Memory Management Museum in Curaçao. Which isn't a museum at all because the public is not allowed in. And they called the archaeologists there and asked, "Do you have these 2 skulls, the giant skulls?" And they would neither confirm nor deny. So when I went to Curaçao just recently in October, I went again and contacted them and asked if I could see the skulls. And they said that the collection was not for the public viewing.
Is that the one with the hand?
Yes, exactly.
I made a note so we can show that.
Yes, definitely. That's one of them. That hand was, what happened was, so this man, Chris Angles, who financed this excavation of the 2 skulls here at the cemetery in Aruba, he couldn't find anyone to research them, but he knew they were giant skulls. He knew you could see it. He knew. And the fact that the hand was fused to the side of the face was very helpful in determining the rest of the size of the body. So eventually the head of the Tropical Museum, which was based in Amsterdam, decided to come over and do research on the skulls. She's an anthropologist, but was invested in the biology, the skeletal remains. She was also an expert in elongated skulls, which the giants did have. So she came over and she did the research on these skulls, and it was from the hand that she determined that the size of these beings had to be over 7 feet tall, possibly 8 feet tall.
Huh.
And she wrote up, thankfully, an entire report with her assistant, and I have that report as well. It's in French because she was from Belgium. And so she then went on to say that she wanted to do carbon-14 dating to determine the exact ages of the skulls. And she then proceeded to go on a plane and was going to, I believe it was Peru, to do some research. And her plane ended up crashing and she died. So, and that was the end of the research into those two skulls, as far as I know, as far as what's public.
Her plane crashed or what?
Yeah, it's very interesting. And interestingly, Chris Angles, soon after he finally published his report about the skeletal remains that he found here, called The Quest of the Giants, he was standing on a corner in Curaçao and got hit by a car and he died. So that was really the end. Yeah, it's very interesting how these things kind of work with the giants. And this is not the first time I've heard about strange, unfortunate situations happening around the giants, of people studying the giants nowadays.
Well, shoot, we got to protect you at all costs.
Yes, right. Yes, I think about that. Try to take precautions.
Yeah, you double and triple up your documents and stuff.
Right, exactly. I do. As a matter of fact, I have them in safes in the United States as well. So I have multiple copies, but that's
So you can't get Heather. She's still she's got plans.
And also, interestingly, I had saved a lot of documents on my laptop that just totally disappeared, and I ended up I couldn't believe it. I was completely freaked out. So now every time I have anything, I print them out. I have hard copies of everything because you can't keep anything on your laptop. It's just too dangerous to keep it there. You don't know. After that, I just decided to print everything, which can get costly, but it's well worth it.
Somebody called it the useless island. Who called it the useless island?
Yeah, so that's the interesting part. That's what made me realize that there was some sort of cover up going on, because there's no reason why Aruba would be the useless islands. When kids go to school here, to public school, that's what they hear about. They hear that Vespucci and the Europeans after him called Aruba the useless island because it was so arid and they couldn't grow anything.
Holy propaganda.
Yes, of course. And because I know for a fact, even at the simplest, there's gold here. So what would be useless about gold? I also think it might have been a subterfuge to kind of steer people away from the fact that there is actually gold here. But also it could be that there is another cover up going on with regarding the giants, and the original name given to the island, which was the Islands of the Giants. There's also documentation to back up Vespucci's claim of naming the giants, the islands of the giants. Curaçao and Bonaire. Well, Bonaire was not discovered yet at that time. It was just Aruba and Curaçao were called the Islands of the Giants. And they in Caracas, actually in Venezuela, there is the first proclamation of the control of the Spaniards of the islands and that whole region essentially. And that was put in the official register, I believe it was 1528. And that document still sits in Caracas. So I'm hopeful someday. My bucket list is to go to Venezuela. And so I'm hopeful someday that I'll be able to see that document firsthand. And it mentions the control, their dominance over the region, including the Islands of the Giants. And it mentions Aruba and Curaçao, but it calls them the Islands of the Giants. And later they discover Bonaire, but Bonaire eventually falls under the Islands of the Giants as well.
That was the whole MO, was cultural dominance.
Yes.
So, yeah, there's some artifacts that are up to 7,000 years old, I heard.
Yes, well, definitely the drawings here for sure. Mm-hmm. And then they have a lot of artifacts. They're here in the museum here, at least 7,000 years old. I tend to think they're older, The original report put out by the archaeologists was that it was 5,000 years old. Then, when Leiden University from the Netherlands came over here and did some sampling, I believe, of charcoal, and I'm not quite sure what else. And they determined that it was at least 7,000 years old. So, for example, some of these petroglyph sites outside of these petroglyph sites, which mainly occur in caves here, and in the other three islands as well, you'll find scattering of pottery. And that pottery was also dated to at least 7,000 years old. So the drawings are also archaic, and they are at least 7,000 years old.
I wonder, has anyone done the archaeoastronomy on the drawings?
Well, actually, I've started to do a little bit of that myself. There was, okay, so I'll tell you the backstory. In 1970, there was an archaeologist who came down from the University of Florida, and he went to Bonaire, and he was studying the drawings in a cave system called Onima in Bonaire, which I have seen. And they're stunning. Most of them have a female presence in terms of carvings and petroglyphs. But he did find a panel of drawings that he felt were Proto-Mayan, which is actually quite interesting. So when he left, and he was an expert in Proto-Mayan. This guy, he was the only man on earth at that time who was an expert in Proto-Mayan. And so when he went back to Florida, he was in the Miami Herald talking about how he had gone to Bonaire and went in the caves and saw these drawings, and actually even saw some of the drawings looked Proto-Mayan. And the University of Florida, and I have that article, by the way, the University of Florida threatened to fire him, threatened to strip him of his degrees, was basically attempting to blacklist him. It was an early form of cancellation from the 1970s, the first guy being canceled, probably not the first, but definitely wouldn't be the last, particularly in this field. And so he had to write a retraction and publish it in the Miami Herald, which I have that article as well. Basically, like a mea culpa, apologizing and a struggle session, and saying basically, I mistook and I misspoke, and I thought it was Proto-Mayan, but it's not Proto-Mayan. It was just the absolute most pathetic thing you've ever seen. And so that was one of the first attempts, to analyze these drawings, and it was shot down immediately, particularly, the fact that he was an expert that was meaningless to anyone. It was just losing the narrative. But I found a giant drawing, speaking of giants, a very large pictograph in the national park. And after I did some calculations, and I have actually purchased software and did some analysis, I'm convinced that it is a drawing, and I have this posted on my social media too, of Orion, and that it correlates with Orion, particularly with the path of souls. And the path of souls is an ancient concept of the series of steps one takes upon their death, beginning with going through the constellation Orion and getting to the Milky Way. And it's a long journey to the afterlife.
That's what everyone was trying to do, right? Building big ass pyramids and shit.
Exactly. Yes, the afterlife was like key to life, and I believe here in Aruba there was a very complex ritual of death, and that complex ritual of death involved, I think, a once a year burial, because in the place where the cemetery is located here in Aruba, most of the year it's covered in water. So the burial of these remains had to have occurred during a brief period in our dry season, which is about the end of August and beginning of September, and probably maybe to the end of September, but then the rainy season starts to begin and the water begins to fill the cemetery. So I believe that if you were dying, say in January, there was no way you were going to be buried. And so they would, I think, stack and store these bodies. That's where I'm actually looking now. I'm trying to figure out, where did they store the bodies and wait for the burials to occur. And I think they allowed the the birds and animals and the fauna here to eat away at the bodies and make the bones clean. Because upon unearthing these burials here in Aruba, you will see that the elongated portion of the skulls of these giant burials is painted in an ochre color. And this ochre is from locally sourced manganese. Now, the archaeologists say that this is from the bodies being buried and then dug up again, and then their skulls were covered in this ochre. And I actually think it's completely not the way it happened. I think there was a time when once a year, maybe twice a year, or maybe the whole month, that they dedicated to burying these bodies. But throughout the year, they were sitting out, turning into skeleton remains, probably becoming bleached by the sun. And then they were able, before burial, to color the heads with this locally sourced manganese that, once in contact with the soil, became this orange, ochre, bright, deep hue of orange. And so I think that if you have this complex ritual of the actual burial, then it's safe to assume that there was a complex ritual of death, and that didn't just involve the physical realm, but the spiritual realm as well.
Yeah. And that that it's a cave in Bonaire, and there's a skeleton that was brought from there. Is that the same one with the hand on the side of the head?
That one with the hand is from the burial site here in Aruba.
Oh, okay.
Now, they're the largest skeleton and the most complete giant skeleton unearthed in the islands was in Bonaire, and it was found by accident in the late 1970s. The archaeological report on it was written in 1980, but in the late 1970s, they were building a bus stop for a new school that was going to be there. And when they were building this bus stop, they unearthed the skeleton. And so that was how they found the skeleton. That skeleton is in a museum that's owned by the Dutch government, is controlled by the Dutch government. And it was the head of that museum, whom I met with, that told me directly that that is a giant skeleton. And he said, it is a giant. He said, we had giants here. It's not the only giant skeletal remains we have, but this is the one that's on display. He has had since retired, sadly. But when I went to him to speak to him about potentially getting a sample, a specimen from the giant that I could independently DNA test. And he said, no, because 3 other people had been there before me. Or two other people had been there before me, a group of archaeologists and these strange people from Italy, and that I don't even know who they were, and he didn't even know who they were. I'm always thinking the Vatican, but so he didn't want any more bone to be taken from the skeleton. He was protective of the skeleton, which I could completely respect. However, as I tried to explain to him, and which has come to fruition, sadly, is that these guys are never going to release the DNA evidence of these skeletons, and we're never going to see the results. I just know from trying to get archaeological reports how difficult it is to get your hands on this information. It's only in these obscure journals and little papers written, and it's kept in their little circles. So I said it would be nice to have an independent researcher come and independently do the DNA studies, and he said no. So sadly, I was unable to test that skeleton myself. And to this day, then that was 2 years ago that I met with him. And to this day, we have not seen any results of the DNA of the Bonaire skeleton. And that skeleton was found by accident.
How big is it?
That skeleton is proposed in the Bonaire skeleton. Actually, the conclusion of the report on the Bonaire skeleton, the investigators concluded that Vespucci's claims were correct and that there were giants on the island. This is an actual archaeological report. So this skeleton was proposed to be at least 8 feet tall. But what was interesting that they mentioned, so at least 8 feet tall, probably taller. It was believed to be a male. And it was interesting that they also mentioned the adjective robust, because the bones are so much thicker. So they believe that this giant just wasn't tall, but was wide, was huge, was thick, was a massive human. maybe 1,000 pounds plus. So, and also had an elongated
Jeez.
skull, very large eye sockets. The area where the ears are is different, where the jaw connects is different, where the neck connects is different from modern humans. So it's has a lot of these anatomical differences to modern humans that are specific to the race of the giants.
Do you have a picture of that?
Yes,
Oh, nice. Okay, just making a note of that.
sure.
Um, yeah, so I really appreciate you how you've it seems like you've really done your homework and also probably had to spend some of your own money tracking all this shit down, huh?
Yes, that's what I give to people. I remember in the beginning, especially people say, "Oh, you're just doing this to sell a book," or I said, "No, I'm doing this because once the giants get a hold of you, you cannot shake the giants." It's like I had to spend money traveling, making phone calls to Europe. I had to order some archaeological reports from antique bookshops in Europe. I had to go to universities. Interestingly, a lot of the study, not a lot, but some of the studies are found in medical libraries, in medical schools,
Hmm,
in universities. So
weird.
why would you have the archaeological reports about the archaic people of Aruba in a medical library unless you knew that it was definitely a case of the giants? So it was just incredible validation on my part that I felt about these archaeological reports and how they are perceived in the professional realm, but it's kept kind of hush hush. So yeah, traveling, doing trips to Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao. These three islands are not cheap islands. It's not like traveling in Mexico. It's much more so expensive and cost prohibitive in some cases. So yeah, you're exactly correct. And I spent a fortune over the years, thousands and thousands of dollars. In some cases, even hiring translators to translate some of the text. This was before AI, of course.
Right, right.
So, which AI is just such a godsend, really, for
It
translating
is.
things. It's like, really, I mean, there's some things it's good at and some things it needs a lot of work. But that, or even like making recipes. I have this in my fridge. Make me a recipe. It's awesome.
Yeah,
Another great
I use it
thing.
for planning basketball practices and game strategies and
Oh,
stuff like
smart.
that. Also, I'm building some programs, mental health, like mindfulness, nutrition,
Nice.
healthy habits
Great.
for a nonprofit I'm working for. But I'm
Wonderful.
using it to build like those programs. It's just I'm telling it what to do. It's just
Right.
saving me a shitload of time.
Yes. Yeah. You have to tell AI what to do. You have to tell them if I have to convert from, because all my things are in American measurements, my measuring
Uh-huh.
cups, all that stuff. So if I'm making something, it'll give me a measurement. I have no idea what it is. I always have to just give me the number. I don't need to see the math and how but you have to really tell AI what you want,
You
because
do.
or else it could take you way off into the weeds.
And yeah, and sometimes it'll just like do it. It'll even when you do tell it what you want,
Yes,
it'll like do its own thing. Sometimes you have to be
yes,
like,
it's
no, stop
annoying.
doing that.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Let's talk conferences as we start to wrap up. You said you've spoken at and been to some conferences. I've been to Cosmic Summit twice,
Oh, nice.
Contact in the Desert, and also the most recent Quest for Ancient Civilization
Right.
conference, which is where I met Headless Giant, Ben, and Nick, and they're the dudes who
Right.
told me about you.
Oh, great.
And you had been on my radar anyway because you show up in places that I'm interested in on YouTube.
Uh-huh.
But here's the thing. So I like unironically, Ancient Aliens is one of my favorite shows. Okay, like I check myself before I wreck myself. That's what this poster's about.
Right.
I remind myself that I want to believe in this stuff. Okay, and for some reason, and maybe it's propaganda and programming. For some reason, all that being said, and I even had a whole conversation with Greg Little. I've never actually went down the giant rabbit hole. Not because I've like not because I'm like but it's like for some reason it's never been. So this is my first delve into the giant rabbit hole. I've got a conversation coming up in a few weeks with Greg. Hopefully I can get him to talk about it, but he's going to want to talk about his new encyclopedia as well. But I'm really appreciative because you've got receipts,
right?
And I'm excited for someone to put this all down into a book. So I really support that effort. And
thank you.
If you do so, feel free to come on back on the show and promo it.
I would love to. Thank you.
Yeah. What do you got coming up next? What is like next for Heather Arnold?
So right now I have a tour company that we've just started. We launched in 2026. It's official. I've been doing tours on the side. Thank you. But now it's called Ancient Aruba Adventures.
Nice.
And so it's complete. We have all different things you can do. You can do a hike. You can, most of them include like a small hike. We can do longer hikes. We can do hikes to where Vespucci first came in, which is just one of my favorite hikes on the whole island. We could go, it's basically for archaeological tours of Aruba centered around the giants. We do trips to the Archaeology Museum, all different types of excursions. And I'm really excited about it. Eventually, what I'm going to start to put together as well are trips to Aruba and then also to Bonaire. So it would be, exploring here in Aruba and then flying over to Bonaire and seeing, for example, the Bonaire skeleton, the petroglyphs and pictographs I told you about, including a 10-foot tall statue of a woman that is in Bonaire protecting this one cave. Yes, she's really cool. That energy is really crazy too. So eventually I'll be doing trips, and God willing, Venezuela gets to a point where it's safe for everyone to travel. I'll be doing tours to Venezuela for sure, because there's a deep connection. There was actually a breakaway civilization of the giants who they found on the border in Colombia and Venezuela, that there was a breakaway civilization of giants. They knew their skeletal remains were the same. The burials were the same. There were two breakaway civilizations, one in Venezuela and then one in Cuba. So, and if we can eventually go to Cuba, I'd love to take tours there as well. But right now, what we're doing are just land-based tours here in Aruba. So if you're in Aruba, please look me up. It's Ancient Aruba Adventures, and I'd love to tour with you and show you what I've been researching, and not just hear me talk about it.
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you about it when we get offline here. Have you been to Cosmic Summit? Are you planning on going ever?
No, I would love to go though. Yes, no, I've never been. It's hard to travel from here. It's not as easy as if I lived in New York, for example. And plus I have a daughter, so I can't just leave her, even though she's 17. I don't feel comfortable leaving her and going to the States, but it would have to be a lot of coordination. I could definitely go. I would definitely want to go. I would love to go. I like the one that you just went to out. Was it in Sedona?
Yes, it was in Scottsdale.
Yeah. Oh, Scottsdale. Sorry. So yeah, that looked so cool. I would have loved to have been there. So eventually, once, my daughter goes to college, I have a little bit more free time. I really want to go to all these conferences. And if anyone wants me to speak, I'd be more than happy to make a special trip. But I would really, it's a really great experience. I've spoken at other conferences and I enjoyed it.
It's great for the networking, right? You'll meet people and connect and stuff like that. Like
definitely.
I don't even want to tease that one, but somebody I met at the last one, big name, is I just booked, like literally right before I got on with you. I did my Tai Chi, and then I booked. I sent the email and booked it, so I'm excited.
Great.
But Aruba, I forgot. Yeah, it's hard to travel. Maybe in like Cosmic Summit 2028 or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, hopefully, maybe even 2027. It wouldn't be, it doesn't need to be that far off, but yeah, definitely. That would be my plan. And I would love to host a conference down here. I mean, why not come down here?
Yeah, exactly. So where can everyone find you?
So right now I'm on social media everywhere, Heather L. Arnold. I'm posting all the time. I prefer my posts on X because I like the audience on X a lot. I like the community on
Yeah,
X. I
same.
find them much more at a different level, not so condescending, not so many trolls. And
Yeah,
yeah, of
agreed.
course, occasionally you'll have it, but I find that the conversation more elevated on X. I am also active on Facebook. I like Facebook because it allows you to post a lot of photos. So any of the
Yeah.
stuff that I talked about, you'll find on and probably X or Facebook. I'm a little less active on Instagram, but I'm trying to get more active. I'm hiring a social media manager, so
Okay.
for my company, so that will really be helpful in getting things out in a timely fashion on across all of the platforms.
Yeah, I just discovered that, well, not just a few months ago, that like you can double post from Instagram to Facebook, your
Yes,
reels and stuff like that. So reels from
right.
any video you do in just one post. And it's just one time, which is super helpful. So
Yes.
cool. I'm just happy I can help get the message out there. And I'm really excited and grateful that you joined the multiverse today. And I think you might have talked me into coming down to Aruba, so maybe we could hang out when we do.
Great. I would love to. I'd love to show you Aruba and all the ancient sites. You would love it. The weather's beautiful. It's
Outstanding,
paradise.
outstanding. Thank you so much again for joining the multiverse.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Subscribe to Dave's Multiverse on YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble today.